Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. If you haven't been here before, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be going through what to look out for when you're buying or if you're owning a Nissan Navara D40. Today we're going to be going over just some of the common faults that are found with the vehicles once they get a bit older, and we'll go through and have a look at some of the stuff that's gone wrong with my specific Navara. And we'll also go through and have a look at all of the recalls. So basically the worldwide recalls that have gone out on these vehicles where they have found an issue with the vehicle and they've actually recalled them back to have those issues repaired. So we'll go through and have a look at all that. First thing we're going to do, we're going to run outside. We'll set up out near the Navara there and we'll go through some of the common faults to do with these vehicles. Alright, we'll see you outside. Alright guys, so now that we're outside, this is the car that we're going to be looking at today, which is my 2008 Nissan Navara D40. This is a Spanish-built D40. Just going to go through a couple of things today just to do with the engine in the car. First thing we're going to look at is the timing chain issue with these YD25 motors. Alright, so with the YD25 motors that these Navaras come with, so this is the 2.5 litre turbo diesel, there's an issue with the timing chains on these motors, which can be quite common. So there's two different types of timing chains that these Navaras can use. They can use a single row timing chain or they can use a double row timing chain. The problem comes when the vehicle has got a single row timing chain. What that does is it allows the timing chain to essentially stretch easier. What happens there is once the timing chain has stretched or the guides have worn out, it causes issues within the engine. It can obviously throw timing out for one, which will make the engine performance worse. But if it gets bad enough or the timing chain actually breaks, it can actually cause the pistons to hit the valves and cause very serious engine damage. So what you want to check is that the timing chain has either been replaced. Nissan have started recommending these to be replaced at 80,000 kilometres and to be checked every 40,000 kilometres after they've been replaced. So what you want to do is you want to just check to make sure that the timing chain has been replaced if it's a single row. If it's a double row, they do last a fair bit longer and they're a fair bit more reliable. They don't stretch quite as easy. If it is a single row and you do need to change it, there are kits available to change it to a double row timing chain, which will increase the longevity of the chain and just make your engine a little bit safer as well. So just on the engine as well, some of these engines, this one doesn't have one, but some of these YD25 motors have got what is called an EGR cooler on them. So it's an exhaust gas recirculation system. What that does basically is it recycles the exhaust gases and brings them back through to the intake side of the engine. What those coolers have got is that they use the coolant from the engine to cool down the exhaust gases as they come out of the engine. What can happen, those coolers can crack internally, and then that allows the coolant to basically be forced out of that system, go into the exhaust system, and either what you'll notice will happen, the car will start blowing white smoke because the coolant is being taken back through into the intake side of the car, or what you'll notice is that your coolant will be dropping down. There's no leaks around the engine, there's no leaks down on the ground or anything like that, but your coolant level is low. What can tend to happen there is when your EGR cooler cracks, the coolant is lost through the exhaust system and you won't even notice it. What we tend to see a lot with these is when they're driving down the road, somebody will be driving them down the road, the car will get hot, it'll overheat and it'll stop. When you open it up, there's no coolant in it, there's no visual leaks around the engine. When you pressure test one of these, so you fill them back up with water and you pressure test them, occasionally from the EGR cooler you'll just hear a very faint hissing noise. But yeah, always a good thing to check. I have heard of some people with the EGR coolers removing them off the vehicle altogether. It is something that you've got to be careful doing because it's actually, some states are a little bit more lenient on it, but some states will be able to defect your vehicle for removing that EGR system. It's essentially an emissions control system. It helps the car be a little bit nicer for old Johnny Polar Bear, basically. So just on that EGR cooler as well, some telltale signs that you have an EGR cooler fault is low coolant with no physical leaks around the engine bay. You've got to be mindful as well, EGR coolers will sometimes give the same sort of symptoms as a head gasket, so you want to just make sure that you get it confirmed as to what the actual fault is before you go replacing parts. Sometimes you'll see white smoke come out of the exhaust, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll have a bit of a funny smell around the car, and sometimes you'll actually be able to see out of the gaskets where the exhaust gases go through. If it's bad enough and the gaskets have got anything wrong with them as well, you might even see some staining around the EGR cooler itself where the coolant's trying to leak out of it. If the EGR cooler does fail altogether and you lose all your coolant, there is a chance that the engine can overheat. These Navara engines don't like being overheated. Normally what happens is once one gets hot, they'll either crack a head gasket or they'll crack the head itself, or if it is done bad enough, it can actually potentially crack the block as well. So really important thing to keep an eye on and to get checked if you think that there's any issues. Easiest way to check them is to get it into your local mechanic and get them to pressure test the cooling system. That'll be your biggest telltale sign. If it's losing pressure and you can hear that hissing noise, chances are it's probably a cracked EGR cooler. Okay, so another issue with the D40s are cracking the firewall around where the clutch master cylinder is. So down here at the back of the engine, I'll bring the camera around and I'll show you. So basically down inside there is the clutch master cylinder for this vehicle. What is happening with the firewalls in these cars is around the clutch master cylinder there, the firewall itself is actually cracking where the master cylinder is mounted in. What causes that is as the vehicle is driven, especially when they're in sort of rougher terrain, so if you're using them off-road or anything like that, the flexing of the body of the vehicle will actually cause that master cylinder, or the firewall around that master cylinder to flex. It then becomes stressed and it then starts to fracture. This one is not cracked, so I can't show you exactly where the cracks are, but I have read some numerous reports around people finding cracks in that firewall, which is obviously is not very good. The last thing you want is cracks in the firewall of the vehicle, and especially if they get too bad, it can become a structural issue with the vehicle. So with the timing chains in the V6 models of these Navaras, there have been a few reports of a weird buzzing sound coming from the timing chain. What those V6 Navaras have got is they have two timing chains on them. So they have a primary and a secondary chain. What the people have found is that on the tensioner for the secondary chain, the shoes or the guides on the tensioner essentially wear out, and then that's what causes that buzzing speed. It does get louder at higher RPM. The fix to that is to replace the secondary and primary chain. Normally you do both at the same time anyway. If the primary chain's good, you can just replace the secondary, and to replace the tensioner as well. That's generally the fix for that one. Okay, so another common issue with the YD25 Navara engines is a failure of the exhaust gas temperature sensor. So basically on the back of the turbocharger there's a sensor which is its responsibility is to read the temperature of the exhaust gases coming out of the car. What was happening is that those sensors were failing, which was causing the vehicle to enter into limp home mode. It would restrict the power output of the vehicle and stop it being able to go over 2000 RPM. The reason it does this is to stop the potential risk of the turbocharger overheating during normal operation and damaging the turbo. Nissan does have a new, basically redesigned exhaust temperature sensor, which is designed to, well, it is a revised version to stop that failure from happening. Much better quality sensor. This has actually got one in it because that same sensor failed in this as well, and it's been in there for around about 12 months. Haven't seen any issues with it, but time will tell to see if it lasts longer than the old one. But yeah, just one more thing to keep in mind of as well. Okay, so for the next part of the video we need to get underneath the car, and I'm just going to show you an issue that these vehicles have with the driveline as well. Okay, so just with these Nissan Navaras, they have been known to chew out the universal joint in the drive shaft. So this is the one that comes off the back of the transfer case. So you've got your rear drive shaft here, which goes to your rear diff. There's another drive shaft up here. I can get the camera to focus it. So through there's another drive shaft. That one goes to your front diff. The one that causes the issues is this rear one here. So what's happening is that universal joint there, they wear the universal joints out and it starts to cause a vibration through that drive shaft. When you're driving, especially at higher speeds, the vibration will get worse and it can be quite a not very nice thing to drive along like that. So just basically easy way to check to make sure that there's no movement in that. Grab the drive shaft and try and wiggle it up and down and side to side and just see if you can feel any movement in those universal joints. Okay, so just back up to the top of the car now. So there is another issue that comes with these Navaras and the Pathfinders as well. Basically, Nissan Navara D40 and the Pathfinder are the same car. One's just got a wagon SUV type, one's a utility vehicle basically. So there's another issue with the Pathfinders and the Navaras when they have the automatic transmission fitted to this model. So same engine, this is still the YD25, but with the automatic transmission. Mine's manual, so I don't have this issue. But what happens is when you're traveling at speeds between 80 to 110 kilometers an hour, especially when you're under load, so if you're towing a caravan, you're towing a standard trailer, you're heading up a hill, anything like that, the car can get a shudder through it. Now that can sometimes be caused by the worn out universal joint, like I said in the last part, but there's also an issue with the automatic transmission as well, where that vibration can be caused by the torque converter in the automatic transmission as well, which will cause that vibration while you're driving. So if you're looking at buying one of these cars, take it for a test drive and try and take it up some big hills and put it under a bit of load. If you do start to feel that shuddering there, first thing to do when you get back to wherever you're going or where you can stop, just jump out, check to make sure there's no movement in that universal joint. If it's not that, it could potentially be an issue with the torque converter in the automatic transmission. Alright, so this next thing we're going to be looking at the front suspension in these D40 Navaras. Now these are quite common to have either a clunking, squeaking or a popping noise when you're going around hard corners, especially when you go all the way on a full lock, or if you're off-road or anything like that, when you get the vehicle sort of, you know, the suspension's at the end of its travel basically. What that's caused by is the bushings in the shock absorber or the strut that's in the front there. The bushings are very tight on the bolts, and basically as the bushing goes to move and it moves over the top of the bolt, it basically starts to bind up on the bolt. Now these have also got a stabilizer bar in the front of them as well, and it's the same thing. The bushings in that stabilizer bar can get old, worn out and quite tight. When the stabilizer bar moves through those bushes, basically the bushes bind up, and it allows the stabilizer bar to go through the bush, that's what causes that popping noise. So you imagine the bush is sitting there, as the stabilizer bar tries to twist in that, it binds and it sort of pops each time it frees itself up. Sometimes they might not pop, so you might not get that clunk or a popping noise, but you will get a large squeak or a groan through the front of the vehicle. So the easiest way to fix any noises in the front suspension of these Navaras is simple as basically buying a good quality aftermarket bushings kit for the front end and getting it fitted, either by your local mechanic, or if you've got the ability to, you can do it yourself. What I would always say is those bushes that come with specialised grease, just make sure you put it on when you fit the bushings as well, just to prevent any binding or anything like that that's going to cause those clunking or squeaking or popping noises in the front end of one of these Navaras. Okay, so if you're looking at one of these D40s with the 4-litre V6 engine in it, and it has a bit of a strange rattle in it at about 2000 RPM, what it's likely to be is the power valve actuator, which is located inside the intake manifold. Now the only way, unfortunately, to replace these actuators is to replace the entire manifold itself, as they're a built-in component to the manifold. So if it does have a strange rattle in at about 2000 RPM mark, I'd be looking at that as your first thing. Another thing with the YD25 engines, if when you start them up cold of the morning, or when you start them up for the first time in the day, if you can hear a strange rattling or ticking noise on idle, what it could potentially be is it could be a partially blocked injector jet. Now, the way that you normally fix them is you can just put a fuel additive in, so an injector cleaner or anything like that. So normally that will fix the issue. If it is bad or the injector is actually faulty itself, you may need to replace the injectors. Okay, now with the clutches on the early models of these D40 Navaras, there have been reports of the original clutch that these came out with failing due to being basically a poor quality clutch. There is an aftermarket kit now, which is a much better upgraded version. So if you are buying one of these, one of the early models that still has the original clutch in it, which is probably unlikely, just be mindful of that. What tends to happen is when the clutch is beginning to fail, what you'll have is when you're going up hills or you've got a load on, so if you've got a trailer or anything like that, when you start going up a hill, you'll feel the car almost surging or basically the clutch slipping. When you get out of the car, you'll normally smell a burning smell, which will be the clutch. It's a pretty distinct smell. You'll definitely know if you smell it. With the D40s with the automatic transmission, they do have a heat exchanger in the bottom of the radiator, which is actually part of the radiator. Those heat exchangers have been known to fail, and the automatic transmission fluid can potentially be contaminated by the coolant of the car, and that can cause damage to the automatic transmission as well. Sometimes you'll hear a strange squeaking noise when the vehicle's idling or when you're going around corners in these Navaras. If it's nothing to do with the suspension, it could potentially be one of these rubber stoppers up on the bonnet here, which basically they go dry and they rub the rubber onto the metal there, which causes a squeak noise. That can be fixed with something as easy as just getting a bit of general purpose grease or a bit of Vaseline or something like that, and just putting it on those rubber stoppers to stop them from squeaking. Okay, so we're just inside of the vehicle at the moment. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the ignition on, and I'm just going to show you a light that is appearing on the dashboard of my D40 here. See you in a second. just start it up. Make sure all these other lights go out. Okay. So you see that flashing light there? That's an SRS warning light. What has happened here is the clock spring that's in this part of the steering wheel here has failed. So I've heard of a couple of people, some friends of mine that have got these same Navaras. They've also had the clock springs fail as well and need to be replaced to stop it, to basically stop that light from flashing and ensure the SRS system is working as it should. Now another thing on the interior of these Navaras is back behind this panel, which is responsible for your air conditioning and your climate controls. This panel here, it's held in by clips back behind this panel, and these clips are very easy to break. And what happens here is when you push on the panel sort of pushes into the dashboard, which is not really ideal. Let's see if we can get a bit of a better angle. If you push on that hard enough, basically that whole thing will fall into the dash, which is not what you want. Now, down here to the four-wheel drive selector. So this is your four-wheel drive selector here for your high and low range four-wheel drive. What happens is those switches can sometimes get moisture in them, and it stops the switches from working properly. What that will cause is when you basically go to engage it in the four-wheel drive, you might get the four-wheel drive error light come up on the dash because it's getting a strange message from that switch, or you may get nothing at all. Sometimes you can pull the switch out, pull the switch apart, clean them out, dry them out, put it back together, and away they go again. Sometimes you do have to replace that switch as well. Sometimes as well, if you're in four-wheel drive and they get water in them, when you go back to two-wheel drive, they won't come out of four-wheel drive, so that can also be a little bit of a problem. Now, the factory head unit in my Navara as well had failed. I don't think that's a very common issue. I haven't heard of anyone else's failing. Mine basically, the screen went out and it had melted one of the boards inside the stereo. So I just went to Repco and just brought this Sony head unit for it, which is got your Android Play, Apple Play, everything like that, which was a nice little thing. Fitted in there quite nicely. I've still got to make up a little bit of something to go around the outside there just to tidy it up a bit more. But yeah, my stereo failed. Don't know if anyone else has had that issue, but if you have with your Navara or your Pathfinder, leave me a comment down below and let me know that it's had a failure of the stereo. Alright guys, welcome back into the shed. Basically what we're going to go through now, so we've had a bit of a look at the faults that are pretty common with these vehicles and some that are specific to just my ute. Just remember, if you do have any issues that you've had with yours, make sure you chuck them in the comments down below. There might be people out there that have had similar or the same issues with their vehicles, and you might have found a way to fix it. It'd be good if you can chuck those down in the comments. Any information to do with these vehicles would be handy for anyone else to know if I have missed anything. If you've got anything that, say, you've had an issue with these vehicles that has been the same as what I've said in the video, chuck them down in the comments as well. Let me know what's happened with yours, how you went about fixing it, and let me know any other information you let me know. Okay, so for this part of the video, we're going to be going through the recalls for these vehicles. So these are worldwide recalls. So this is basically Nissan going, yep, we've got an issue with the vehicle. We need to bring them all back in and we need to fix that issue. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with these. What I will do is I'll just give you a brief overview of the recalls that have come out on these Navaras. And what I'll do is I will chuck each recall and the link to the National Recall website in the link I'll put all the links in the description down below. So that way, if you do have an issue with one of these, you can go through, you can see the VIN range. So basically, from this VIN number to this VIN number, these are the ones that were affected by it. You can see what's applicable to either the one you're looking at buying or the one that you already own. And you can just have a bit of a look there and you can see what needs to be done on yours. You can ring this and you can find out if the recall's ever been done. Really handy information to go through. Okay, so one of the big recalls that came out with these D40 Navaras was a fault with the steering shaft in the vehicle. It was where part of the shaft had actually become detached while driving, and the vehicle would lose all of its steering. So really important fault, super critical. There were quite a few of these Navaras that were affected by this fault. So what I'll do, I've chucked the link for that one down in the description. Go and have a look, just make sure that the VIN number for the one that you're looking at buying or the one you already own isn't in that affected group of vehicles. Okay, so another recall on the Navaras was the rear wheel bearings prematurely wearing out and potentially damaging components in the back of the vehicle. So when you're driving, if you hear this faint sort of rumbling noise behind you, chances are it's probably got a worn out rear wheel bearing. So there is a recall on them. They put an upgraded wheel bearing kit into the vehicles and improved them basically. And in the newer models, I think from 2008 onwards, they were running these upgraded wheel bearing kits as standard. Again, link to that recall will be in the description. Okay, so this one's to do with the braking of the vehicle. So there was some non-ABS D40 Navaras that were having issues with the braking. So they were actually losing their brake fluid. And basically they would lose all their braking power, or they wouldn't lose all of it, they would lose, they run a parallel braking system, so they would lose the brakes for two wheels of the vehicle. So you say your left-hand front brake you would lose, and your right-hand rear brake you would lose. So you would only be left with two wheels with brakes being applied, which would massively or dramatically affect the performance of the brakes in the vehicle. So what was happening there is the ABS box where it was mounted was rubbing on one of the rear brake lines in the non-ABS versions of these Navaras. After X amount of K, so much driving, that little box would actually wear through the steel brake line and cause it to leak. Then it would leak its brake fluid out, and it would cause the issue with the reduced braking power basically. Link to that recall will be in the description as well. Okay, so this one is to do with the ID plate. So basically this is the build plate that Nissan puts on the vehicle, which shows its VIN number and the details around the vehicles. There was a few of these Navaras that came out that had incorrectly stamped build plates on them, and people were having difficulty registering them, and bits and pieces to do with that as well. Link to that recall is in the description. Okay, so this one I've actually seen before. So this is the latch mechanism that holds the bonnet closed while you're driving one of these Navaras. There has been a recall on these, which is basically to come in and to replace that latch mechanism. What was happening? You drive down the road, go over a bump in the road, the latch would actually break or come open, and the bonnet would fly open while you were driving. This can be really dangerous. If the bonnet was to come up and hit the windscreen, it can potentially block your view of the road, or if it was to damage the windscreen, that has a potential to hurt one of the occupants of the car as well. So link to that recall is in the description as well. Really important one, make sure you check that one out. Okay, so this one is to do with the engine in the Navara. Now I'm not sure exactly which engine, whether it's the 4 litre V6 or whether it is the 2.5 litre turbo diesel. I'm not 100% sure with that one. What the issue is the vehicle stalling while you're driving and then not restarting. What it was a relay inside the ignition module for the vehicle was becoming contaminated with a buildup of silicon dioxide and basically making it so that the relay was no longer working. That would cut out the power to the ignition circuit of the vehicle and make the engine in the vehicle stop. When you went to restart it, it would wind over, but you would get no start basically. Link to that recall will be in the description as well. Now this one is to do with the D40 Navara STXs with the alloy wheels. What was happening is that the alloy wheels, around where the center is, so where the wheel nuts go on and hold the wheel on, it was actually cracking around the spokes on the wheel. And I remember seeing, I think I saw a YouTube video once, the wheel actually broke free and came off the vehicle completely. So if you are looking at buying one of these, or you own one, good thing always to do is just have a bit of a look around the entire rim. Just make sure you can't see anything that looks a bit suspicious and you can't see any cracking in that rim. Really important thing, the last thing you want is one of your wheels to come off while you're driving. Okay, so with this one, I'll take you back outside. I'm just going to have a little bit of a look at the chassis rails and the tow bars in the back of these Navaras and just explain what's going on there to do with this recall. I'll put the link to this recall in the description as well, but we'll go outside and I'll show you in a bit more detail of what's going on with this one. Okay, so I've just decided to come back out just for this little bit. So this is to do with the recall that was on these vehicles, to do with the tow bar and the cracking of the rear part of the chassis rail here. So what was happening is where this tow bar is mounted to the chassis rail, because the chassis rail walls are so thin, it was actually cracking the chassis rails down through this bottom corner of the rail. What was having to be done there is that back part of the rail was having to be repaired, and they've now made these new plates to basically bolt up to the chassis rail to stop the chassis rails cracking essentially. So they've just strengthened all this up. But if you are buying one of these, some of them haven't had this modification done because cars do miss recalls. So just check where the tow bar is mounted to. Just check to make sure there's no cracking around those chassis rails. Another little thing as well with these Navaras, the paint that is on these chassis rails is quite crap. and the paint comes off and the chassis rails rust, especially if these vehicles have been used to put boats in water or anything like that, around, or been around salt water. Some of these rails can get incredibly rusty. Mine did have a little bit of rust on it when I first brought it. All I did was get the wire wheel in there, cleaned all the rust out, primed it and just repainted it, and I haven't really seen much rust come back in. There's a little few spots here and there where I didn't quite get it well enough, which I might redo, but overall it's pretty good. But just be mindful, just where you can see it, just make sure you check all the chassis rail really well and make sure that there's not too much excessive rust in there as well. Okay, so on to this next one. This is to do with the seat belts in the D40 Navaras. So from factory, there could have potentially been an issue where the passenger side seatbelt was incorrectly fitted to the driver's side of the vehicle and vice versa. When you're involved in a collision or an accident, this can affect the performance of the seatbelts. I'll put the link to that one in the description as well. Alrighty guys, so that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some of the information in this video useful. If you do have anything that's happened to your D40 Navara or your Pathfinder, feel free to chuck some info in the description for me. I'll try and reply to as many comments as I can. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, press the subscribe button, leave me some comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao!